Hi, welcome to For Better For Verse, the podcast where a married couple, a theologian, and a philosopher are taking on the scriptures. I'm Justin Crisp.
I'm Jewelle, and today we are talking about Exodus, starting with chapter 32, all the way to the end, and then the entire book of Leviticus.
So after this week, we are going to be all caught up. Thank goodness we managed to just plow through reading the book of Leviticus,
Yep.
practically all in one sitting. So we're going to give you the greatest hits. We're starting with the Exodus chapter 32. There's an event here that we want to take a look at. The people of Israel are badly behaved. Surprise, surprise. And what's going on, Joel?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have to remember where we left off last week. Moses was up on the mountain with God, keeping up there for a total of 40 days and 40 nights, right? So during this time, of course, the Israelites get a little antsy,
Mm-hmm.
and they think something happened to him, right? I mean, at the beginning of chapter 32, they say, as for this Moses, the man who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what happened with him, right? Who knows what happened to him? He just disappeared. And so because they're getting anxious, they want some sort of symbol of God being with them, which Moses usually let them know. And so they come to Aaron and they complain, and he says, okay, fine, give me all your gold. And he melts it and turns it into a golden calf. This is what they're doing. They're getting ready to celebrate the golden calf, have a day of the Lord. When Moses comes down from the mountain with the 10 commandments, the tablets in his hand, God has inscribed himself. And he's just a wee bit mad about it, let's say. Just a wee bit mad. Throws them down. And then there's some definite killing that happens.
That's one way to put it.
Definite murder going on there. So this is, I think, an important story for Exodus because it shows, once again, the Israelites they have a very short memory, right? I mean, 40 days, I guess, that's a long time. But, think about all the miracles they've experienced leading up to those 40 days, months and months of miracles. 40 days of silence, they get antsy and they're like, we got to take this into our own hands. We got to do something about this. And of course, even though God is upset with them and frustrated with them, God still claims them as his own. And he still goes through with the covenant that he told Moses he was going to establish up on the mountain. But it is a little dicey there. A moment or two.
Oh my gosh. So I want to underline one thing that you just said, which is that God never gives up on the covenant. God has to be reminded in the drama of the drama that's being told and retold by the author of Exodus. Moses has a kind of priestly function here vis-a-vis the rest of the people of Israel. It's Moses' brother Aaron who is going to become the technical priest, the actual priest. But Moses has a kind of priestly role. Priest here meaning somebody who mediates between God and people. This is one of the reasons why Jesus is occasionally, particularly in the Gospel of Matthew, compared to Moses, that Jesus is a priestly person like Moses was. Jesus makes intercession for us according to the theology of the Gospel of Matthew, underlines God's fidelity to the covenant, reinforces it, ensures and secures divine forgiveness of sin, and so on. And that's exactly what Moses does in the back and forth of the drama here. Again, I don't think that God actually forgot the covenant or forgot God's love.
Or was willing to give up on it or anything like that.
No, I do think there are these divine attributes, namely God's love and God's justice, which conflict with one another when their object is a world like this or people like us. Love and justice, faithfulness and truth, they don't always compute.
Right, absolutely. I think that as one of your professors would say, right, to have sort of love, total love, means giving up on justice sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think, if nothing else, the narrative is making that apparent to us, that saying sort of God is giving up his claims to justice here.
Yeah.
Because of the covenant.
That one divine attribute is kind of winning over the other one. And you get that in the narrative, the story that's being told in Exodus chapter 32, which has a literal back and forth. In verses 7 and following, God informs Moses that the people of Israel, while Moses has been up on the mountain, have created this calf. God's the one who tells Moses before Moses even goes down. And he threatens to consume them, threatens to destroy them. And Moses, it says in verse 11, implores the Lord his God and says, "O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you brought out of Egypt? Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did he bring them out to kill them in the mountains?" I mean, he plays to God's ego. Like, the Egyptians are going to think you're really
I
puny
know. They're going to think,
God.
oh.
you let these rabble rousers among your people like get the better of you and disturb your peace and your calm and so on. So he says, turn from your burning anger and relent from this disaster against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, aka Jacob, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self, and you said to them, I will multiply your offspring and give you this land, etc. And the Lord relented from the disaster that he had spoken of bringing on his people. And so you've got this back and forth between these divine attributes, which is being played out dramatically, actually dramatically, in the form of a story. I think that's one thing I want to underline is the role of the story here and the kind of theological point of it. So that I don't think it's that God literally needs to be reminded of anything, but I do think that, love and justice do conflict with one another an awful lot. And this is going to be the story of the rest of the book of Exodus and Leviticus.
And the whole thing, the whole Bible.
The whole Bible. That's actually true. The second thing that I wanted to underline is that Moses then goes and gets a look at what's going on for himself. And that's when Moses loses it.
That is when he loses it.
So God relents from the disaster that he's going to bring upon the people because Moses talks him out of it while he's still up on the mountain with God.
Before he sees it, but once he sees it, he gets really upset.
Loses it. Shatters the tablets of the Ten Commandments, which were written by God himself, and proceeds to not only berate Israel, not only berate Aaron, who, orchestrated this whole thing.
Yeah.
But also it does crazy things like melt the calf, turn it into powder, scatter it in water, and make the people of Israel drink it. That's verse 20 of chapter 32. Wild stuff.
That's some interesting punishment going on there.
Moses is losing it, right? Moses ain't perfect, and Moses doesn't relent of the disaster that he wants to bring upon his people.
His justice really won out.
Really won out. I mean, if you can even call it justice, I think there's a lot of anger
revenge
here.
A little bit. Yeah.
It is.
Absolutely.
The third thing that I want to underline is that there's something about the idol and the idea of an idol itself that the God of the Bible is opposed to. And it could be easy to think that the God of the book of Exodus is just opposed to idol worship because this God is like petty and jealous and doesn't want for God's people to pay anything else any mind. But I think there's something else to it. First of all, the calf isn't real. I mean, the statue's real, but the calf isn't actually a god. And the people of Israel are actually walking around saying, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt."
Pointing at the calf.
Pointing to the calf. So they're trafficking in falsehood. So the idol isn't real. The idol isn't actually God, and they're ascribing things to it that aren't true. But the second is that because this idol isn't actually God, this idol can't talk back to them.
Can't tell them they're wrong.
Can't tell them they're wrong. Can't tell them that it loves them. Can't tell them anything. This idol can't talk back. An idol is something that we can control and manipulate. And if there's anything that's been made clear in the stories of Genesis and Exodus so far, other than the fact that human beings are terrible, it's that God is a consuming fire, a wild and woolly reality, too hot to handle, real.
Not a tame God.
Not a tame God. This God is real, and this God talks back. Boy, does this God talk back. And this God makes demands on people's lives and on their loves. And that is scary.
It is. It is.
That is scary.
It's out of your control. It's out of the people's control. And you don't know what that God's going to ask of you.
No. And it could be incredibly tempting to turn to an idol. And I think that I am always tempted to turn to idols that I think I can control. And it's not that I'm, walking around processing statues around my house saying, these are my gods who brought me out of the land of Egypt.
We
Or,
don't have any more calf statues.
Well,
We never did.
thank you. Yeah, for all those at home, don't worry. We don't have some
We
kind of cult going on
never have.
over at the rectory. But I am always tempted to invest my hopes for my future, my security, your security, Beatrice's security, in things I think I can control because they don't talk back to me. Things like, my career, just for the sake of my career, don't, not my priesthood. That's something that
No.
involves the living God, is completely outside my control. A lot to say about that for another podcast.
Yeah.
My vocation is completely outside my control. But my career, my accomplishments, my resume, my financial well-being, the this, that, or the other, I'm always tempted to turn to something which is material, like the statue, and something which won't talk back because I think it's going to be tamer and safer than the God
Safer.
who's real. And this God is not safe, although this God is love. And you do get that at the very end of the story here.
Absolutely.
God does forgive their sin. God does remember his covenant. This God is still a God of loving kindness. It's just that the people's injustice is bumping up against God's determination still to be with them and to love them. And that's a real, genuine conflict in the heart of God.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a pretty good example of that happens in chapter 34. So this is when Moses cuts the new tablets and puts them out for God, and God comes and passes in front of them. And as he's doing this, he says, the Lord, a God, merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love to the thousandth generation, yet no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the parents upon the children and the children's children, the third and fourth generation. And I think that sometimes when we hear this, it sounds like a vengeful God. And we're like, what? Where'd that come from? But if you see what just played out, he's saying, I'm not clearing the guilty, but I have a steadfast love. And he does. He continues to love them. And that's what God's actions show over and over again, even if the language at times feels scary.
Yeah. The, the at this point in the progressive revelation of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Jesus Christ, the God of the Bible, they are still trying to figure out how to say both of these things at once, that God is loving and that God is just.
Yeah.
I think it's noteworthy that, yes, it says here that God is going to punish the guilty by punishing down to the third and the fourth generation, but he's going to reward the righteous and keep steadfast love for thousands of generations. And thousands of generations is a whole lot. It's a whole lot longer than just 3 or 4. And what you see here is that this biblical story is wrestling with how do you hold these two things together, and that comes to a climax at the very end of the book of Exodus. The next couple of chapters see Moses and his confreres doing as they were told to do a couple chapters before. We talked about the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, the inner sanctum, the Ark of the Covenant,
building
all that
it,
stuff.
beautiful designs. I mean,
It's gorgeous.
And the people are giving more and more.
No expense was spared. It is beautiful. I love the commentary on the craftsmen. They're actually named by name in the text.
Sweet?
I mean, like the individual people who are like the carpenters and the, who made the vestments for Aaron and the priests. I love all that stuff. So they do all of that, and God is going to dwell inside of the tabernacle in the inner sanctum of this tent. And there is this moment at the very end of Exodus, chapter 40, verse 34. And it ought to send chills down all of our spines. It says, "And the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle." It is like we have the restoration of the Garden of Eden inside of this tent. This is the theology that's been in the devotional commentary provided by the Bible Project. I think it is right on. God is back with God's people in a tangible place right here. And the glory of the Lord has filled the tabernacle. But next verse, Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the clouds settled on it and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. God is back, but nobody can get in there.
Nope. We're all on the outside.
All on the outside. Moses can't actually enjoy the presence of God, cannot actually behold his glory because Moses and his people are not holy, and God's holiness and our unholiness are just incompatible. We cannot stand in the presence of God unless we are like him in his holiness, his life and liveliness. And we need a solution to get us in there
Right.
with
We
God.
need
And
some sort of fix.
that's what Leviticus is
That is
about.
the book
This
of Leviticus.
crazy book. This is where you stopped your last read through the Bible, right?
Right. So
you made it farther than me. I got bogged down in all the details of how to build a tabernacle.
Yeah, when I was a teenager, I decided I was going to read through the Bible, and I was just reading through it straight. I didn't have a reading plan, and Leviticus is where I stopped. So returning to it was, I don't want to say triumphant. It was actually a lot less triumphant. It was a lot more sort of humble.
I'm with you. But what do you make of Leviticus this time around?
Yes, yes. So now that I know more, and now that I know how to reach out to commentaries and other scholars, it makes Leviticus make a lot more sense. So Leviticus is very technical book of rules, particularly about these specific rituals for this community in order that they can be with God again.
Yep. In chapter 9, verse 6, we're told exactly that this is the whole point of the exercise. Moses said, "This is the thing that the Lord commanded you to do, that the glory of the Lord may appear to you." That's the whole point, is for the priests and for the people to get to behold God's glory. And at the end of chapter 9, after the first sacrifices have been made, there's another spine tingling moment. Moses and Aaron went into the tent of meeting, and when they came out, they blessed the people, and the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people, not just to Moses and Aaron, to everybody.
Everybody got to see it because everybody was
in a spiritual state where they could behold such a thing and be in God's personal company.
Yeah.
And then verse 24, and fire came out from before the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the pieces of fat on the altar. And when all the people saw it, they shouted and fell on their faces. The New International Version says they exclaimed with joy, fell on their faces.
Yeah.
This is the two reactions that I think all the great spiritual writers have said characterize the direct and personal experience of God. Joy, like ecstatic joy beyond anything we could ever imagine.
Ever.
And you got to get low.
Get low. Something about God's holiness just makes you want to bow down.
Yeah. And so that's the point of the whole thing, of all of this complicated technical stuff, so that the people can behold God's glory, and it actually works.
And they have that
at
moment.
least once. It works.
Yes,
It works.
absolutely. No, I think you're totally right. I think that another thing about Leviticus is that it is so focused on this ritual system. It talks a lot about ritual purity, and that can sound foreign to us, especially if our introduction to it is post reading the Gospels, because in the Gospels there's a lot of language about purity, but this, ritual purity. But this is one of the things that Jesus is arguing with some of the Sadducees and the Pharisees about, because they're sort of making that equal no longer ritual holiness, but purity, but morality, or being morally good.
For them, the moral good and ritual purity are the same thing. And that's not the case
And
actually
not
for
what
Leviticus at all.
is saying. No, it's not. And so it's very something you have to kind of separate in your mind when we talk about ritual purity. Is literally so you can be with God.
Yeah.
Versus morality or something like that, which is a different kind of question, different conversation that's not in Leviticus.
In chapter 10, God tells Moses to tell the priests that their job is to distinguish between the holy and the common, the clean and the unclean, and to teach and to follow God's decrees. And God's decrees, that's moral good and bad. The clean and the unclean is this ritual purity system. And the holy and the common is, as we've said before, about what it means to consecrate something, to name it as holy. It means to set it aside for a divine purpose, for divine worship, to give it to God. And there's nothing wrong with things that are common. Common and common is fine.
It's just not taking holy, sacred things and treating them as common.
Exactly.
That's the thing you have to avoid.
And these three binaries structure the inner world of Leviticus, and they're not they're not all translatable into each other. The holy versus the common, the clean versus the unclean, and then the commandments and obedience or disobedience thereunto.
Yes, absolutely. They don't map on each other easily.
No. The bits about the clean and the unclean, I have to say, as a certified germaphobe and as a fan of things like magic
I
erasers,
wondered if you enjoyed that.
yeah, I'm kind of enamored of the clean and unclean thing. Not the details, okay? But the idea is interesting. I do think that when they're talking about clean,
Mhm.
they're kind of talking about clean. They're kind of talking about hygiene.
They're talking about hygiene for a lot of it, yes.
You have to think, I mean, this is a world way before modern science. They aren't even close to modern science or germ theory. They just know that when certain people get sick, I mean, there's chapter upon chapter about skin diseases.
There's so many about
If you have a skin disease, you go to the priest, and the priest
I
declares
know, can
whether or
you
not you're
imagine
ritually
that's
clean
your
or unclean. And if you're unclean, they quarantine you. Yeah, I mean, it sounds so cruel what they're doing, to us with modern ears, because it says
the
somebody who's unclean is like shunned. They have to leave the people. They have to go outside the camp. But it's just a pre-modern version of quarantine.
it is quarantine. Quarantine, absolutely. Isn't it fun that the priests are responsible for all this? I wondered what you
Ugh.
think about that, you, as a germaphobe, right? The priests are the ones who are saying, "That's mold, that's not mold."
Mold. There's a whole chapter
There's a
on
whole
mold.
chapter, can you believe it?
I mean,
Chap
mold makes you ritually unclean because anyway, I think there are a few things that I would say here. It's very important that we distinguish between what is time bound and
Mm,
specific to
mhm,
the worldview of the biblical authors and only to that worldview, which
mhm,
is no longer our worldview, and what is universal for us
mm,
in this understanding of the holy and the common, the clean and the unclean, and the
yes.
commands. And I think that the particular details about what's clean and unclean, most of that is time bound
Mm.
and contingent, meaning it's not applicable to us today.
As much as you wish it was, perhaps.
Well, I think it's a good thing for things to be clean as opposed to unclean. But there's a lot of things here which they
Like,
say are unclean,
I
which
know,
I think are perfectly fine.
well, like bacon.
Yeah, like like bacon. So that rule comes from the fact that the people of Israel are required only to eat clean animals, which mean they have a cleft
A
hoof
cliff
and
and
they chew the cud.
chew the
So that, pigs don't meet that criteria because
camels.
they got hooves, cleft hooves, but they don't chew the cud. Camels don't because they chew cud, but they don't have cleft hooves. So
Mhm.
both camels and pigs are unclean. Anyway, yeah, you have to imagine that like a couple of Israelites got sick after they ate these things. And the priests were like, if we let everybody eat those, maybe that food's not that good to eat.
Yeah, maybe it's just not a good
No.
choice.
Things like they can't consume blood. They have to eat all their meat well done. And this is because there's a belief in their pre-scientific worldview that the life of the animal or the creature is in the blood itself. And so
Mhm,
they don't want to consume the life. They want to dispose respectfully of the blood and even to bury the blood
mhm.
of an animal if there's no other specific regulation required, based on the kind of sacrifice
Right,
that
right.
it is.
Mhm.
Often priests are doing other things
They're
with
throwing
blood.
the blood on the altar, etcetera.
Yeah, and that's the part that not the actual throwing of the blood onto the altar. That's not what I'm gonna say is universal. But the idea that there is something that has to be done within our relationship with God in
Mm,
order to clean things up, that is universal.
mm,
What I think is happening in the theology of Leviticus is that sin and wrongdoing, when you wrong another person, it clouds your relationship with that other person and with God. And what happens is that as the people of Israel sin, the interior of the temple that they built, this tabernacle, it becomes polluted and dirty. It's like their sin is spiritual smog. And in order to clean that away, in order to get rid of the pollution, they do sacrifice particular animals based on the particular sacrifice that is mandated for the particular thing
Whichever
that
thing
needs
they
to be
did.
fixed. And they do things like sprinkle it on altars, and that cleans, they thought, that
Cleanses,
pollution. It gets rid of the pollution.
cleanse the aura.
Yeah, it is. It's like cleansing. It's like cleansing an aura. Uh, and that, I think, is true so far as something has to be done with our injustice. These two things, love and justice, God's determination to be in covenant relationship with us, and God's inability to be in the presence of injustice and wrongdoing. That needs a solution.
Hmm.
And the solution here is thought through a hygienic metaphor. And so they think that the sin pollutes, and so you got to clear the pollution by cleaning it. That's what's going on with all these sacrifices.
Absolutely. They are making a clean slate. They are
Yeah.
setting Eden back to its original place, right? Each time that they sin, it sort of takes it farther and farther away from being like the Garden of Eden,
Mm.
sort of the tabernacle. And so each time they do an offering, it's kind of bringing it back to its state where it was.
Yeah. If we can see the theology of sacrifice and the point of it,
Mhm.
about it being a way to reconcile love and justice, really reconcile love and injustice, and to separate that from the particulars, certainly of the dietary law, but also particulars around certain kinds of sexual relations. Leviticus has a lot to say about sexual
Has a
relations.
lot.
Some of those sexual relations that Leviticus says are unclean, and some of the translations say detestable, are ones that we today in our post-scientific worldview would also say are unclean and detestable, particularly relationships between human beings and other animals. But some of them, right? The one of the texts of terror, the so-called texts of terror,
Hmm.
with regard to sexuality, the prohibition on same-sex sexual activity, verse 22 of chapter 18, you shall not lie with a male as with a woman. That depends upon this pre-modern, pre-scientific worldview that could not possibly imagine a faithful, loving, covenanted relationship between a man and a man, or a woman and a woman, anything other than a relationship between two people capable of biological reproduction, a man and a woman. That worldview, it didn't compute. And so it puts that kind of activity into the same category as, consuming meat which isn't cooked all the way through,
Hmm.
as it puts it in the same category as, like, having a moldy house. That's just untrue. Same-sex sexual activity doesn't belong in the same category as a moldy house. The author's worldview that puts it there, and I think it's important to distinguish between what's contingent to that worldview and what's really true, while also saying that the distinction between what's clean and unclean, and the fact that we have to do something to clean up the aura of our relationship with God, that's still universally true.
Yeah, so it's a lot of looking through Leviticus is a lot of discerning, does this rule still apply to me?
Yeah.
Right? And many of the rules don't.
Right.
But the general ideas behind the rules, that we are in relationship with God, and that when we do something wrong, it messes that up and it needs to be fixed. Is that is that is a truth. That is still true today.
That's really well put. Arguably, none of this, or very little of it, applies to us today because of the way the new covenant interacts with the old covenant. Us here, meaning Christians.
Christians.
The new covenant, inaugurated by Jesus, takes this theology of sacrifice and wraps it all up into one full final sacrifice made by Jesus on the cross. One of the reasons why I actually really like the book of Leviticus is that I really like the New Testament book of Hebrews. And the New Testament book of Hebrews is interpreting what Jesus accomplishes
As
for us through the lens of this. Jesus is cleaning up, not Jesus is cleaning up the relationship and doing everything that needs to be done so that we, like the people of Israel, that one time in chapter 9, can all behold the glory of the Lord.
Can behold the glory of the Lord.
And he does it for us in such a way that we don't need to make any more sacrifices.
I think what you're saying is absolutely right. Maybe you heard me almost stop myself as I was talking about explaining Leviticus, because I said, we have to do something to right ourselves. And I had to stop because we don't have to do anything to right our relationship with God. We as Christians, because we already had a mediator. We already had a priest go ahead and do that for us. Right. And so So as you said, yes, very little of this. I mean, there's still some good things about like, keeping an eye on mold and,
Yeah, absolutely.
not like harming your children that are like pretty good rules.
Pretty good. Prohibition of child sacrifice. Definitely
We'll
support
we'll
that one.
stick with that one. Yeah.
Yeah, that one's universalizable today. Maybe not contingent, just simply to the biblical worldview.
Right. But the sort of need for a way to connect back to God, that is universal. And that is something that much of the rest of this book is trying to figure out
Yeah.
in places and contexts that are not just Israel in this time.
What's interesting is that in Leviticus, God has put together a plan for the people to fix their own relationship with Him. It's human priests and human members of the people of Israel who are orchestrating all of these sacrifices. And they have to be done over and over and over again because none of them, they can't keep their act together long enough. They can't clean up their act long enough to prevent them from having continually to clean up the inner sanctum of the temple, which represents their relationship
Not to
with
mention
Him,
once a year they have to have a special day dedicated
called the Day of Atonement.
just to this. Yeah.
And so I think that Jesus' self-understanding is that He is God coming to fix the God-human relationship, the God-world relationship, rather than humans or the world trying to fix the God-human relationship. Leviticus gives us a lot of the structure using language which is very foreign and ideas which are very foreign to 21st century readers, but it gives us the language and the structure to think about our relationship with God and how to reconcile love and injustice in God that the rest of the scriptures are going to build upon and use. It's why Leviticus is like the most disliked book of the Bible. It's the one we all make fun of because we have stories like, like yours. Yeah, I got my own version of that story, my dislike for Leviticus. But without really understanding this basic dynamic that's set forth by Leviticus, you really can't understand a lot of the rest of the book.
Right. I think that this sort of connection with God and the ways in which we mess that up is essential to understanding the whole book and all of God's story with humanity.
Yeah. Leviticus ends with a summary of that, actually. It says that if you are righteous and you follow all these commands and ritual regulations and regulations for worship, then God will bless you with plenty and abundance, and God will be with you. God will walk among you. A restoration of Eden. And then it says that if you don't, God will abandon you, give you up to opposing nations and so on, and it's just going to be a really bad time. But God will be merciful and God will not completely abandon the covenant. And that's really where we're going to stay because
basically there
they can't keep their act together.
No.
They even can't keep their act together within the pages of Leviticus. Two of Aaron's sons immediately go into the tabernacle and they do unauthorized sacrifices, and it's just not a good thing.
No.
God has to keep trying to build a bridge to us. And God's going to end up in the long run having to build the whole bridge himself from both sides,
literally
his and
build
ours.
it together, connection.
So we took a look at the end of the book of Exodus, the temptations of idolatry, the problem that unholiness cannot be in the presence of the glory of the Lord. So you've got the glory of the Lord dwelling inside of the tabernacle, but Moses can't get in. Then you've got the theology of Leviticus, which is that if we can clean up the relationship, aura, as it were, of our relationship with God, and you can enter into the presence of the Lord. And the people of Israel get to at least once.
At least once, all of them.
And then it goes off the rails then and continues to go off the rails. And we'll be joining them next time as they continue to wander through the wilderness in the book of Numbers.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us.